This is my open letter to anyone who will listen. Sexual apartheid is the outrage of our century. In Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and other countries ruled by Islamic laws, millions of women and girls are segregated, degraded, and relegated to second-class citizenship. Keeping women and girls separate and unequal are important pillars of Islamic rule, affecting every aspect of people's lives. Sharia law itself specifies that a woman is worth half that of a man, and that she is the property of her male guardian, needing his permission even to travel and work. As the source of so-called corruption and chaos, women and girls must be segregated at workplaces, schools, libraries, universities, in sports and recreation, transportation, the health system, and even when attending weddings and funerals. In Iran, there are even plans to segregate pedestrian walkways on the basis of sex. Alarmed at the large number of women university students, the Islamic regime threatens to limit female enrollment and change textbooks based on, quote, gender differentiation. According to an official of the Education Ministry, quote, the spiritual, physical, and mental needs of boys and girls are not identical, and therefore textbooks that give them information cannot be the same, end quote. From age 9 on, girls must be veiled, a symbol like no other of what it means to be female under Islam, hidden from view, restricted, and suppressed, consigned to walking around with a mobile prison of one's own, separate and unequal. Like I said, the outrage of our century. They say a society's treatment of women is a measure of its freedom. If so, the mistreatment of and discrimination against women is a measure of the degree of influence and power of Islamic and religious laws, whether in Iran or Britain. But stop, I am told. Saying so just supports, quote, Western propaganda. Something, by the way, the Islamic regime of Iran often tells women and men it is hauling to prison and execution. How absurd. It is like Iranian women's rights activists telling one to stop opposing US-led militarism because it supports, quote, the Islamic regime of Iran's propaganda. The religious nationalist, anti-imperialist left, always ready to act as a prefect when women's rights under Islamic laws are concerned, have an affinity towards Islam, which it views as a, quote, oppressed religion, bullied by the US. It is an anti-colonial movement whose perspectives coincide with that of the ruling classes in the so-called Third World. This grouping is on the side of the, quote, colonies, no matter what goes on there. And their understanding of the so-called colonies is Eurocentric, patronizing, and racist. In the world, according to them, the people in those countries are one and the same with the regimes that they are struggling against. So at Stop the War Coalition demonstrations, they carry banners. Things here in Britain, they segregate men and women. And they urge unveiled women to veil out of solidarity and respect. But even their anti-imperialism, their badge of honor, is pathetically half-baked. It does not even scratch beneath the surface to see how political Islam is an integral part of US militarism and the New World Order. Their historical amnesia of even the past 30, 40 years ignores that the political Islamic movement was encouraged and brought to center stage by Western governments as a green belt vis-à-vis the former Soviet Union during the Cold War. They conveniently forget how in Iran, for example, it was supported in an effort to crush the left and working class revolutionary movement. Or how political Islamists are some of the US's closest allies. They fail to see that in practical terms, notwithstanding the differences, political Islam and USA-led militarism are two sides of one coin with the same agenda, the same vision, the same infinite capacity for violence, the same reliance on religion and reaction, the same need for hegemony. It should not be surprising then that anywhere US-led militarism has intervened, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Palestine, politicized Islam has either been brought to power or strengthened. This type of politics denies universalism. It sees rights as, quote, Western. It justifies the suppression of women's rights, freedoms, and equality under the guise of respect for other cultures, implying that people choose to live the way they are forced to, and imputing on innumerable people the most reactionary elements of culture and religion, which is that of the ruling class. In this type of politics, the oppressor is victim, and any criticism racist. Whilst the anti-imperialist left defends and justifies political Islam on the one hand, the virulently racist and right-wing defend US militarism and the brutal Israeli occupation of Palestine on the other. They include groups and organizations like Jihad Watch and the Horowitz Freedom Center. The latter even has a, quote, Islamofascism Awareness Week in front of women's departments across universities in the US and rattles off facts about the horrendous status of women under Islam so that it can help promote the neocon agenda of bombing men, women, and children into so-called liberated swamps like Iraq. Like the Stop Islamization of Europe campaign, these groups have, quote, difficulty with the concept of a moderate Muslim. And they believe, quote, that the onus is on Muslims to ensure the safety of non-Muslims, end quote. Why? As if it is the onus of safeguarding Spaniards is on all those who are Basque or deemed to be Basque. They are, quote, concerned about the rights of women and apostates, so they can ban the Quran and Muslim immigration, so-called Muslim immigration, so they can stop the, quote, subhuman, teeming hordes destroying the Christian nature of Europe and the West. They are quite happy to defend religious morality, restrict the benefits due single mothers, demand exceptions from the sexual orientation regulations, bar funds for AIDS-related and contraceptive-related health services abroad if they provide abortions, and consider the women's rights movement and fight for equality, quote, the destruction of the nuclear family and of all the power structures in society in general. According to their warped worldview, quote, the West has skyrocketing divorce rates and plummeting birth rates, leading to a cultural and demographic vacuum that makes it vulnerable to a takeover. Both the anti-imperialist left and the right wing refuse to see millions of people as truly human, with innumerable differences of opinion and belonging to vast social movements and progressive organizations and parties, and worthy, I believe, is their due. Their politics has nothing to do with improving and changing the lot of humanity and women's status, and is in fact an obstacle to its advancement. It is within this context that left and progressive groups, socialist and mass movements within the Middle East and elsewhere are challenging people and organizations everywhere to take a principled human stance against sexual apartheid vis-à-vis both camps of reaction. This is the challenge that the women's liberation in Iran brings to you today. Clearly, sexual apartheid must enrage civilized humanity into an international movement that is about changing and improving people's lives. But in order to succeed, this movement must reject both US-led militarism and political Islam, and rely on and support a third camp of the millions of refusing and resisting people across this globe. To do so, it must be uncompromisingly secular and humanist. It must refuse to tolerate the intolerable. It must raise the banner of universal rights. It must defend the right and historical duty to criticize religion and defend the freedoms and equality of people everywhere. To succeed, it has to have at its very core a defense of the human being. In 1973, as a result of international pressure and widespread opposition to the apartheid system in South Africa, apartheid was recognized as a crime against humanity. On the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day, let us proclaim that sexual apartheid too is a crime against humanity. We must accept nothing less. Thank you.